house now. Just making sure. So I mentioned this a little bit. What, sorry?
Introduce herself.
What?
She was going to introduce
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead, Eve.
And I was just going to let Amy know that she's muted, but maybe she wants to be muted. Amy, you're muted.
I'll stay muted for now. There's enough background noise in my world coming and going that, yeah. So yeah, I'll stay muted until there's something essential to share. Thanks, Eve.
So, well, I was about to start saying, I'm so sorry for interrupting someone. This is our first time running through this course. We kind of just started putting this together, and so y'all are a little bit.
Make sure they can hear you.
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay? Just because we're both on one computer. Is this cool? So this kind of course came out of just a bunch of different things, a conversation we had with Amy, and thinking about how we can all start to kind of use the skills we've learned with Cooperation Humboldt and the American Red Cross to help other organizations build resilience programs and do more work to engage with their community and build community resilience. So we were talking to Amy, and it sounded like there were a lot of really amazing programs that were kind of discussion groups and a lot of energy towards this kind of work in HUUF. But there was a thing we've seen a lot in a lot of organizations that people aren't quite sure what to do with that energy, or like how exactly to go from kind of discussion into action. So this is very much a course focused on like how to turn those conversations into action. And because we're such a small group, we're really hoping it can be very like targeted about what y'all actually want to be working on specifically, and how to get there and how to build programs and improve the programs you have. So we are super excited. Yeah, do you want to go on to the next one? And we'll have a round of like what is an organization, and then we'll do check-ins and stuff first, which is so.
This me.
So the objectives of this course specifically is to give a little introduction to the concept of community resilience and building resilience, and how that can relate to your organization and your space. And we definitely want to engage everyone here and get like input on like we're presenting this information, but we really want it to be something that you can take back and apply it to your organization any way that you feel is appropriate or that you would like to. And so the objectives of this course are, there's six weeks to this, so a 6-part course. The first part, where we're going to be providing like an introduction to local resilience and disaster preparedness, response and community organizing. We're going to be assessing your specific organizational needs and the capacity, so what you are capable of doing and willing to do, and then assessing your community that the community that HUUF serves, assessing those needs and the capacity, building comfort with community organizing for resilience, and then hopefully by the end we can help to establish an actual action plan for moving forward. And so the format of this course is it's going to be, like I said, 6 workshops over 6 weeks, every Wednesday at this time, 60 to 90 minutes each, just depending on how long discussion goes. And then it's going to be over Zoom. And then we're going to have like us presenting information, but Q&A, a lot of room for Q&A and group discussion as well. So
next one.
So about the organizers. So the 2 organizations that came together to put on this presentation were Cooperation Humboldt. I'm not sure how familiar y'all are with Cooperation Humboldt, or if you've heard of Cooperation Humboldt, because I know that you've all heard of American Red Cross, but Cooperation Humboldt we're a local nonprofit grassroots organization that really focuses on building a solidarity economy in California's North Coast. And the solidarity economy, the idea of that is it's just a network of organizations and people and communities that are all like supporting one another and the work that each organization is doing. And it's the opposite of competitive. It's a cooperative model where we're all working in sync with one another and supporting each other as much as possible. And so Cooperation Humboldt's doing a lot of various projects throughout the community, covering all sorts of different issues and different areas of work. And one of the One of the more recent areas that we are exploring is the disaster response and community resilience. Pretty much all the work Cooperation Humboldt does is in regards to community resilience and building a stronger community that's more connected and more supportive of each other. But the idea of exploring like disaster response and resilience related specifically disaster is something that came up a little once COVID happened and the wildfires happened this past year in 2020, and it kind of developed from a very nice relationship that we formed with American Red Cross, which is the other organization.
So as I guess our kind of Red Cross rep on this call, though I've also worked a lot with Cooperation Humboldt, I'm pretty sure everyone here familiar with the Red Cross kind of know what it's about, what it does. Cool. But yeah, one of the things that I found really awesome about the Red Cross in Humboldt specifically is that, you know, there is kind of that set list of trainings and preparation and response and the kind of what you think of as your more run-of-the-mill disaster response work. But particularly here, the Red Cross has really taken a turn towards understanding that long-term, really deep-seated community resilience is how we prepare for disasters, and it is how we respond most effectively to disasters. So we're building a lot of partnerships with other organizations, especially with Cooperation Humboldt. So I'm really excited that that both these organizations kind of capacities have come together to put this on. Next slide.
So this is it. Like we have a pretty small group here, so there shouldn't be any like struggles with organizing the conversation, but we did put together just a little like list of agreements. So one mic, one diva just basically means like it's just, you know, silly talk for one person speaking at a time, just so we don't have a lot of people speaking all over each other. Assume positive intent. So, you know, if someone says something that rubs someone the wrong way, just don't assume that that was meant to hurt anyone. It's that, if anything, is an opportunity to explore that person's perspective and kind of open the floor there. Move up, move back just means that we want to make space for everyone to give equal input. And so if you are someone who finds yourself speaking a lot, maybe like giving the other people space to speak. And if you're someone who maybe is shy or finds yourself not speaking a lot and not feeling like you want to contribute a lot, maybe like using this as an opportunity to engage more. Stack just means, so in the chat, I'm not sure how familiar y'all are with Zoom, but in the chat, if you have something that you want to say, just write stack, the word stack in the chat, and we will be kind of monitoring that. And that way it's kind of like raising your hand.
I was gonna say, given that we have such a small group, we could probably just raise hands.
Right,
today,
because we can see everyone
yeah.
who's there. So you can just raise your hand if you have a question. And land the plane is just like a short term for just kind of get to the point that you're trying to make. There's no bad questions, so please ask as many questions as you want. And this course is for you to use in whatever ways that serve your community best. So we put this together, but we want to make it, and this presentation is pretty generic for like any organization that is interested in this topic, but we want to engage the discussion to be more specific to HUUF and the needs of your organization.
So just giving you guys the.
Can I ask a question? How was this put out to HUUF? I wanted to join Cooperation Humboldt, but I don't know how it was put out to HUUF.
How this course was put out to HUUF?
Yeah.
It started with a conversation with, we reached out to Amy because we were originally looking at some other organizations in Bayside and looking for how to build, specifically targeting the Bayside community. And then we had a long chat with Amy a few weeks, maybe a month ago.
Who's in a Cooperation Humboldt study group.
Yeah, and Amy is also, I think you're in a Cooperation Humboldt study group. Yeah, and familiar with the organization. So we were talking through HUUF's needs, and then I think Amy sent this out to listserv once we kind of talked through, what might be really beneficial. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm just wondering why there aren't more people here.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's COVID burnout. I think everyone's a little bit tired of Zoom would be my guess, but that is part of why we want to record it too, so that.
But also you could always tell more people, about this, and so next week more people can come. Maybe some people just weren't.
I'm in a group called Reflections on Thursday night, And I told him it was my intent to get involved with Cooperation Humboldt. And other people said, oh yeah, that's great, you know? So.
Cool. Yeah. And feel free to send this, recording out to whoever in your networks and tell them to join in next week. We'll be keeping this going. Same bat time, same bat channel for 5 weeks after this. So
Yeah. Better yet, just tell them how much fun you had and how awesome.
Yeah, and then like you're so prepared to take on every disaster now.
I'm hoping we confirm that and make that true at the end of this meeting. So
I don't know. I don't know if many HUUF folk had enough communication, from the site, but I know that it just went into the weekly this past week, and that's how I noticed it. But if there had been, for the past couple weeks or so, maybe more people would have showed up. Maybe they will in the future. I'll work on some of them.
Awesome. Any other questions before we kind of dig into? I'm just going to do a quick rundown of what the next 6 weeks are going to look like, and then we'll get into the actual kind of topic for the day. Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So this week, we just sat through this kind of general introduction to what we're doing here. And then we'll get into the more specific topic, which is just kind of a basic overview of what we're calling practical community resilience. So what community resilience means, what practices tend to be involved in that, and then getting into a deeper discussion with y'all about how you guys and HUUF fit into that more specifically. Next week, the Red Cross will be facilitating it, and we're talking more through the kind of what you might think of as like generic, like 101 disaster preparedness, things like how to prepare your home and business and have a kit and have a bag and have a plan. And the Red Cross will be going through the Red Cross Ready rating, which is just kind of a checklist for an organization to see where they're at with regards to kind of disaster preparedness. The next week we'll be talking about becoming a resilient hub. A resilient hub is essentially a local like community center or neighborhood hub of any kind that can be used by the surrounding community in the time of a disaster. It can be a resource for having, let's say it has solar panels on the roof and you want to go charge your phone because the power's out, or there's rainwater catchment or community garden. It can be a place where people are linked up with resources, where food is prepped and served, where meetings are held. It's pretty flexible, but one of the things we were talking about with Amy before too was what it could mean for HUUF to become a resilient hub for the Humboldt community, and the different kind of ways that process could work with y'all. Week 4, I'm really excited for, I'm facilitating that one, is basics of community organizing. So the stuff we usually think of as activism, not, and not necessarily, standing in the streets protesting activism, but more how do you actually get a community together to accomplish a shared set of goals for, be it to exert some kind of political power, or, just to bring the neighborhood together to do a certain project or get people talking and working together in a more organized way. The next week after that, week 5, we'll be talking about neighborhood mapping and assessing needs. Neighborhood mapping is essentially going through your neighborhood and seeing what resources there are there, what needs there are there. So that can be anything as kind of not shallow, but like high level as, where are the hospitals and where are the, nearest fire departments and things like that. But you can also take it so much deeper to being like, who has extra vegetables that they're willing to share with their neighbors who might be going hungry or might have, lack of access to food, who has, an elderly grandparent living with them who's going to have trouble with mobility, and in a time of disaster, someone needs to go and check on them. Who has tools they can share with the neighborhood, who has a car they don't drive and like their neighbor could use, like those sorts of things. Can be extremely valuable for just long-term resilience. And also if we're talking about climate resilience and adaptation and building a different kind of way of living on this planet, that can be a really valuable set of practice to that. And then last but not least, our last week we'll be talking about what to do from this course in your future work. So how to kind of looking back on what we've learned, what are the next steps? What does this actually look like applied in the work y'all are doing? So that is what we're doing here right now. Most of these are scheduled for 90 minutes. I really doubt they'll take that long, but we just didn't know how long the discussion time was going to go and wanted to give us all some breathing room. So, so that's that, but we should probably be out of here after about an hour every time. So I think we can jump in, and just so y'all know, there will be plenty of time for Q&A in a little bit. And please let me know if I talk too fast. I do have a tendency to do that. So I'm going to try to slow down. So you can go on to the next slide. This is going to be one of those slightly boring times when I read directly from my slide, but I want to capture the idea of what is community resilience, because I think we all have a bit of an idea when we think of that. You know, we tend to think of you know, people who are in touch with each other, neighborhoods that have solar panels, we think of gardens, we think of things like that. But community resilience is really, it's not a one set thing. It is, I'm just going to read, the ability of a community to absorb the shocks of disaster, meaning when a disaster strikes, that disaster does not completely collapse the infrastructure of that community. So people aren't going hungry in that community. People aren't suddenly, you know, without shelter and nowhere to go. People's communication networks haven't broken down. Their lives, their emotional, relational networks don't break down. They can still access the things they need. That's what I mean. We say absorbing the shock of a disaster. Respond to shocks in ways that keep communities intact and functioning, meaning that if there are shocks, if there are some breakdowns in the kind of fabric of the community, that community has the ability to address those needs fairly quickly and easily. To integrate the lessons learned from challenges. So we're constantly, I think everyone on this call would probably not fight back if I was like, we're going to be dealing with climate disaster for a long time, that like this is kind of the new normal, and that the more we can pay attention in times of disaster and reflect back on what went well and what went poorly in terms of our preparation and response, the better prepared we are for the future. And then of course, through that learning, transform to meet the challenges of the future, because, you know, fact is fire season's not going away anytime soon. You know, we may have more viruses in the future, you know, and these kinds of, there's an ethos, I think it's an organization in Detroit, and their slogan is get ready, stay ready. And so I want to kind of hit home the point that community resilience is not a stagnant thing. It's not, you know, you install these solar panels and have this many gardens and you're golden. It's a really active process that we're all learning, you know, as we go through this. We're finding out what works and doesn't work, because what works and doesn't work can be very, very different depending on the given community, that community's needs, that community's resources, and how disaster, or even, you know, the things we don't typically think of as disaster, I'll get to this in a little bit, impact that community, and how we can encourage that community to continue growing and thriving and responding well and caring for everyone within it. So yeah, I think we can go on to the next slide.
Before we do that, I just want to ask like our attendees here, like if you, just to engage in a little thought, like think of some ways that you've seen resilience in your community. And I'm curious, like if you have anything in mind, that is something you've seen that's like been really resilient and has made you feel safe and cared for in this community.
We have neighborhood watches. I don't know how many. It's an online thing, and everybody connects and leaves information on there that can be helpful to other people. And you know, just the neighborhood watch thing. You know, I've lost a cat, you know. Can anybody help me look for him, or, you know, let me know if anyone's seen him, up to what were these people out here prowling around our houses, you know, should we be concerned? And, you know, the normal neighborhood watch thing, and it's been really great. I just discovered it recently. A friend introduced me to it. And they've got it so that it's sectioned off different areas, so that people are connected with people in their area.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of community resilience and a way to organize that. What about you, Joanna? Have you?
Oh, well, I'm getting ready myself and, you know, and everybody knows my whole front yard is fruit trees and raspberry plants and stuff. So my neighbors, but I, you know, I know some of my neighbors have gardens in their backyard and stuff, you know, it's just, I have my whole property is edible. But yeah, so I'm getting ready myself.
That's amazing.
But,
And that's a perfect example of like you and your like property would be a perfect example of like in the process of neighborhood mapping. It would be, your house would be like in your neighborhood, like your house would be noted as, you know, fruit trees here, enough food, you know, for, you know, this many people. So like if a huge disaster happened, people would know they could come to your house and if they didn't have food and could get some sustenance. So that's a perfect example.
And I
Oscar,
recently got up to my, you know, I have a water coming off my roof and I now have 500 gallons of water. So in a disaster, you know, I'm going to have water, you know, and I have a crank radio that I'd wind up. So I have that. And at the end of this month, I'm going to get a Tesla battery, which means that in a disaster, all my electricity will work in my house because the Tesla battery will go right from my solar, won't be going out. It'll be coming right here.
wow.
So,
Okay.
I was gonna say, I also have a lithium-ion battery. They are the best thing ever.
So,
Actually,
Joanna, you are the perfect example of someone who like is resilient in disasters. So thank you for sharing that. That's amazing that you have that stuff. And Oscar is wanting to make a comment.
Yeah, to just, you know, say what Sabrina just said a little differently is that's inner resilience is what you have. And that inner resilience is that mindset of I'm going to have a water catchment system and electricity and food. And so that inner resilience comes before you can even you know, community resilience. So I'm really happy that you can acknowledge those things. And so you've come to this well prepared already. And so, you know, a lot of people aren't at that stage, but it's good to acknowledge that you are. And so thank you for being inner resilient already. And, you know, you'll have a much easier time seeing the connections.
so that kind of brings me to something I meant to say on the last slide and didn't, which is that a lot of times when we think about, I like the term resilience more than preparedness, essentially, because I think when we think about preparedness, the image we have in our minds is this bad thing is coming. How do I get ready? And that all comes from this place of kind of fear and preparation for that fear. Can you stay on that back? Thank you. Whereas resilience, like we all know that going to a community garden is fun. You know, like talking to your neighbors can be a source of joy and love and connection. That, you know, living in ways that are sustainable and regenerative with the earth, I think, you know, I'm sure Joanna, you found and gardening and things like that, that there's a joy that comes from that resilience isn't when we talk about resilience, we feel a lot better when we talk about preparedness, and they are the same thing, more or less. You know, there may be some more specifics under the umbrella of preparedness, like having a first aid kit, but when we think about, you know, training as a healer and learning how to heal your community, be it, you know, psychologically and emotionally, giving support to one another or giving medical attention to one another, those practices of resilience are nothing to really, there's no fear involved. They're kind of beautiful and joyful activities of connection. I say it with some, you know, an image of some wildfires on the screen right now, but it is also important to keep in mind that as kind of beautiful and fun as resilience is, that does have a very practical and serious application when it comes to ensuring our communities aren't crushed under the weight of these disasters.
I saw Amy's hand.
I'm sorry?
I saw Amy's hand, so I just want to make sure we didn't miss it.
Thanks, Oscar. I just wanted to give, I guess, just a little, just as I was thinking about, you know, kind of that larger scope of resilience, not just in pure practical terms, but is in terms of, you know, how we offer support during, I mean, like just even as far as HUUF's concerned, you know, I feel like we, you know, in addition to COVID and all of the, you know, it's like we lost our minister, we are functioning without, you know, a DRE who would be the person who, you know, tends to and works with families. And so that I feel like the community has done a pretty tremendous job, and, you know, our teams of our various committees and volunteers and, you know, of keeping connection. And yeah, so I had more specific stuff to say about that, but I just wanted to put that in there too, because upon reflection, I feel like we've done a pretty good job of boosting our emotional and communal resiliency a little bit. So yeah.
That's awesome to hear. And yeah, I think that is something too that we'll get more into this. I don't actually know if I even put this in this slide deck, but that resilience also so much is about emotions, is about care, is about, you know, being there for one another, even in ways that don't seem very kind of material, you know, that being a source of joy or laughter for someone in the midst of a crisis can be the thing that keeps that person from kind of crumbling under it. Which gets into something that I really wanted to hit home in this slide, that when we talk about, first of all, when we talk about natural disasters, so we think of like fires and floods and hurricanes and earthquakes. There's a disasterologist whose name I'm completely forgetting, who does not use the term natural disaster. And what she says is that there is no such thing as a natural disaster. Like anything, any act of nature, like a fire or a flood, interacts with human community in a particular way. And that depending on that, how that community is structured and how that society is structured, that disaster can have all kinds of impacts. You know, a wildfire burning through a forest with no homes in it and no animals that are, you know, the animals can get away in time, and it's just a natural part of the forest cycle. It's just that, it's a natural part of the forest cycle. But when these disasters encounter community structures and societal structures that can't meet them and can't adapt to them and respond to them, that's when they turn into disasters. So keeping in mind that like how we prepare for, respond, learn from, and adapt to changing climate conditions affects whether or not, you know, these are huge disasters or they're kind of a part of the cycle. Which is, I'll talk about this maybe later, but there's a whole kind of philosophy called deep adaptation that's very focused on this. The last thing I wanted to say was, I'm going to hold off and finish this slide first, and we'll have some time for Q&A in a little bit. The last thing I want to say was that when we also, a lot of times, we tend to think of disasters as wildfires or hurricanes, but the disasters that most deeply impact our lives oftentimes look nothing like that. They could be things like a mental health breakdown. They could be a death in the family, an assault, an eviction, a substance abuse disorder, and maybe smaller disasters, but I know far more people, and I would guess many of you do too, whose lives have been deeply impacted by trauma more than, say, wildfires, like, you know, relational trauma or something like that. And that keeping that in mind too, of like how our communities just care for one another, that is too a practice of resilience in the face of the disasters that are making our communities' lives more difficult. Going to the next slide. So the next thing we're just going to talk through is just some of the basic kind of understandings of like what are the practices that are typically done for community resilience. And then after that, there will be a section for Q&A. So if folks don't mind holding your questions until then, just so I can get through some of this. So neighborhood mapping, I talked about a bit when we were going through the overview, but that really kind of detailed neighborhood mapping that comes from living in deep relationship with your community. So knowing what your community has and what your community needs. You know, are there people in your neighborhood that are struggling in certain ways or lacking access to different kinds of services or resources? Are there people in your community who have more than enough to share? And how can you, as a kind of community organization or a center or a hub that is giving to your community, help, you know, those community members meet one another's needs? Because oftentimes there isn't really a need for some third party to come in and kind of do an act of charity. Those kind of peer-to-peer relationships can be formed if people just knew that one another existed, right? And had some way to kind of make those like assets and needs match up, which is where community organizing comes in. And community organizing is essentially just organizing. It's finding ways for people to be in communication with one another in an accessible, organized fashion, where they can work together and build a base of kind of connection and relationships and awareness of one another and comfort with one another, that they can accomplish things together. Next slide. Resilient infrastructure, which is what most of us, I think of when we think of community resilience. So things like having solar panels on your roof, having a generator or a battery, having rainwater catchment or community gardens, having medical supplies around. One of the things that's like an issue for Humboldt, for example, is like we only have these certain highways in and out. And if there's a mudslide and that mudslide cuts off our access to certain medical equipment coming in, do we have the ability to produce those things locally? And do we have the infrastructure we need to get those needs met locally? I think that's actually on the next slide. I a little bit skipped ahead. Mutual aid is it's kind of a term used for this idea of sharing in peer-to-peer relationships, like community sharing with one another. So what we were talking about before on neighborhood mapping, that neighborhood mapping can build that pathway for mutual aid to happen. And mutual aid, there's a group called Mutual Aid Disaster Relief as well. They're kind of a DIY disaster response organization, and their whole philosophy is solidarity, not charity, meaning I'm not above you giving to you in providing this for you, you provide this thing for me, and we are working together towards shared goals. Next slide. So when I talk about distributed production, that's what it is, ensuring we access to the things we need locally. So I think one of the examples that many of us felt was power outages caused by PG&E. That if we don't have power that's being generated locally, let's say from solar farms, or even non-renewable power, and we don't have access to that those resources aren't in our hands, and that we're not the ones making decisions about them, then we don't have access, and somebody else can cut off our access, or a disaster could cut off our access. We saw this a lot during COVID, and we're seeing it now too, that supply chains are being disrupted, where because the market has been disturbed by these COVID interactions and COVID shutdowns, that certain supplies aren't being produced in the same ways, and there may be a shortage of different things. We haven't seen it, I think, too bad here, but those things can happen in times of disaster. So the more distributed production there is, the more resilient a community is. And then last, but certainly not least, what we think of as more traditional disaster preparedness and response. So knowing mutual aid, knowing first aid, having access to food and water and shelter, having, a bug out bag or a go bag, having people in your neighborhood or in your family, your household who are trained in CPR and first aid, knowing that there are shelters nearby or offering to shelter someone else. And yeah, being prepared so that if these things happen, they're just a thing that happens as opposed to the thing that destroys your life. So on that cheery note, now it's just kind of a general Q&A section. And then just to let folks know before we go on, the next section is our group discussion, getting into where y'all are at and what you guys want to work on. And yeah, so I know I saw Joanna's hand before.
Well, if something really happens, it's going to be maybe up to a week before any city is going to be able to help people. So you're going to be on your own, for all your food, your water, everything, so that's why community is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such an important comment. And I think there's kind of two things rolled up into that I want to draw out. And the first is this idea of you are the help until help arrives, which is actually, there's a workshop that the Red Cross puts on, or the Red Cross hosts. I'm sure if we don't think it's not our workshop, but we do it and offer it to people. But it teaches you what to do in kind of the immediate event of a disaster if you don't have emergency medical services and things like that. But on a broader sense, that's so important too, which this idea when kind of talking about distributed production or something happens, having those things available locally and then having relationships with your community members is so crucial, because I know like our house doesn't have gardens. We could set them up, but we haven't done it yet. So if there was an immediate crisis and we didn't have access to vegetables, we'd have to have some kind of connection with somebody, you know, in the neighborhood who would be producing that. And that, you know, like Joanna, you have such an amazing array of food and other resilient infrastructure. And I'm guessing, don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing if there were a disaster, you'd be completely open with being like, hey, you know, neighbor next door, here's some fruit, here's some veg, you know, do you need to charge your phone with my solar panels if you don't have some on your house? And those kinds of relationships. And that's how, you know, we build connections and community and have these relationships of love with the people around us too, is like those material connections can be so vital to building, you know, richer, better lives for ourselves. Yes, Oscar.
I have a question for Amy, who actually, you surfaced something really interesting earlier in relationship to, you know, what HUUF offers in the existing program areas that you guys are working on. I was wondering if anything came to mind after having Anna present her section of this workshop.
Can you clarify that for me just a little, if things came to mind as far as?
Oh yeah, earlier you were like already mentioning like, you were connecting dots about like, you know, what HUUF does and like how, you know, how you kind of see some transition. So I was just trying to surface that here.
As far as some of the kind of the resilient systems that we have kind of put into place during the last year or so.
Yeah.
You know, I feel so one thing, I feel like we've had some really great leadership and a lot, you know, like typically the minister, right, holds a really, really pivotal central role in a religious organization, right? And so functioning without that, you know, we assembled a team where we basically had to look at like, okay, so we have this major gap within our organization. You know, normally we would have this really central figure that we rely upon to do so many things. You know, they're giving sermons, they're providing, you know, emotional, psychological, you know, pastoral care to individuals that need it. They're supposed to be our face to other organizations in the community that we want to link up with and do work with. So we had to come up with this whole laundry list of needs and wants and duties that needed to still be filled during this time. And just look at the ways we could meet those needs in a really non-traditional way. So, I mean, one thing that I'm personally really proud of that's still ongoing, you know, trying to develop it with, especially as, you know, we've gone into the, you know, I don't think we ever made it to the blue, but, you know, we definitely were hanging out in purple for a good long time. And the UU in general has been much more conservative as far as in-person gatherings. So we assembled a volunteer pastoral care team, and that's we have like 4 credentialed, trained ministers within our congregation who all step forth to say, I have this training, I have this experience, I have this skill. I don't need to get paid for it. I can't handle the whole community, but I can be available. You know, I can do some office hours. I can be available on a Zoom call. I can make some phone calls. I can do some visits. And that's, I was really, really proud of that, you know, coming together, because there was definitely the need, you know, we get calls to the office and, you know, there was like, what do I do? What do I do? And then this team assembled to go and meet that need. That was like kind of a key example. I mean, there's the part of me that wishes that we could have found safe ways to utilize our actual physical infrastructure more. I mean, we have this really beautiful, amazing building, right? That's basically just been sitting empty. But yeah, that was an example that I'm proud of. I feel like we've done a really good job. And there's others, you know, that's one of the first ones that comes to mind though.
I think that's so awesome to hear, and also exactly the perfect segue into our next. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, on the negative side of things, we are back in purple again as of this morning.
Mm-hmm.
On the positive side of things, the vaccines are here and they're happening, but it's a matter of, it's a waiting game at this point.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Go ahead, Amy.
I just wanted to pop in one more thing because, you know, during all of this time, and we've been looking at how to function without, you know, that kind of pivotal figurehead who would typically be at the top, if you will, the pinnacle of our organization. It's been a real, you know, hands-on learning experience about how to do kind of non-hierarchical work, you know, because you're not looking to that one elevated, you know, charismatic figure who's going to come in and do all the things, right? All of a sudden we all get to kind of roll up our sleeves and, you know, like you were saying, like what are our skills? What do we have seated at the table here? And maybe, you know, we don't, you know, I don't have the hat or the letters after my name or, you know, what have you, but maybe I have these things in my toolkit that can be offered. So it's been a great experience to see that come forth, that kind of non-expert, non-hierarchical offering. So
I want to kind of riff on that too, because one of the things we see so often, especially in times of disaster, are these sort of ad hoc, you know, if someone's got an open wound and you're not a doctor, but you know how to, you know, care for a wound or something, they're not going to care in that moment, you know, and that these, this was not in any way to discount experts or say that those levels of training aren't important at all, but just that there are just so many opportunities we have, and disasters kind of often act as this like reset on what we think is possible. There's actually a really great book all about this called A Paradise Built in Hell, which I have a quote from at the end of those two slides by Rebecca Solnit. But this whole idea of this, you know, when we just have to make do with what we've got and get through it and do the best we can, all of a sudden we get really creative in our ways of viewing the world, viewing our relationships, viewing ourselves, viewing what we have to offer. And it kind of begs the question, what if we were that creative all the time? You know, and that's, you know, there are so many great reasons why we're not, you know, we get locked into patterns and routines and ways of looking at things and ways of dealing with things, which make a lot of sense, incredibly valuable kind of heuristics for our lives. But there is something so powerful in these moments when the labels come off and we just look at what we have and say, what can we do? And I also, just as someone who really believes in like democratic, non-hierarchical organizing, all the things, shout out for learning how to do things without hierarchy. Thanks for raising that. That's awesome. Any other Q&A questions before I get on to the more deeper group discussion that we've already totally gotten into, because y'all are so awesome and giving really amazing examples of what you're doing. Cool. I'm gonna turn it over to Sabrina, who is our group.
Yeah, thank you. So we're here because Cooperation Humboldt and the Red Cross are, you know, reached out to HUUF, and Amy is part of HUUF and came to Cooperation Humboldt as well. And so we just started having a conversation about what it would look like, you know, the overall community of Bayside, or, you know, Joanna, you say you're in Eureka, and so whatever community that you consider yourself a part of, and the role that your organization can play in being, you know, a resilient hub, so to speak, for that community. And so Amy, you kind of already touched on this about what is your organization already working on for community resilience. But you know, what are your strengths and skills? And I think that that's really important to touch on, because by identifying your strengths and skills, it can kind of help you figure out where you want to go from there. But I mean, there's obviously always space to develop new strengths and new skills to create new pathways. But yeah, so I just want to open the floor. Joanna and Eve, I'm not sure like how involved you are with HUUF, or, well, Eve, you said you're in the social action committee. And so
In the
yeah, I'm just wondering.
Committee, and
Joanna has been too.
Oh, Joanna is too. Yeah, great. So I'm sure you can.
we have a climate action. We have a climate action committee that I'm involved in, and I'm a speaker, and yeah, so I'm involved. I've been there for 7 years, so yeah, and I really miss.
What is the climate? What does the climate action committee do?
Well, right now, I just got an email about it. we're trying to replace our furnace with, we have solar on the roof, and we're using that to make heat using, I don't know exactly how it works, they have an email about it. Let's see, yeah, in the notes that they said that's what they were working on. So we're trying to make it more sustainable there, and, talking to people about it, how we, as we want to replace refrigerators and stuff, how we all want to make it all sustainable.
That's amazing.
We do a lot of other stuff out in the world too, we've had speakers, well, this is before the pandemic, talk about climate change, somebody who has done data on this and talking about, telling us about 50% of Americans know about climate change, and then there's another 25 and 20, 10 or 15. You don't want to try to talk to the people that are just, no matter what you say, they're never going to hear you. You have to talk to that other group that's going to be, you're going to be able to talk to them and they might hear you. And, so, we've had, a lot of people that we've brought in to talk to our community about climate change. I'm not the only one. John Schaefer is involved with trying to get lawmakers to make a carbon tax, and there's quite a few other people. And
Wow. So yeah, it sounds like you're doing a lot within the organization and for the community, which is another thing I was going to ask is what HUUF is doing outside of HUUF to support either other organizations in their process to building more resilience, or just other community members and supporting them becoming more resilient, maybe helping people learn how to like build a garden in their own yard or things like that. Just to name an example. Eve, I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe say something just to give everyone a chance to talk. If you don't want to, don't have anything you want to add, but I'm just curious what your reflections are.
I think all of this is, you've got a lot of great ideas going on here. I myself have loved to organic garden so much in my life, and I'm not able to do it right now. And it might be a discussion for things that maybe we can do at some point at HUUF. I guess as spring rolls around, it's something for me to investigate otherwise too. I know a lot of the ones in town or close to town or close to Bayside that do this, that they have plots that they rent out, and sometimes it might be good if folks went in on some of those.
Yeah, that's something like that is definitely like related to this. Like it would probably look something like a small group from HUUF getting together and maybe coordinating something like that and like renting out a plot space. Amy?
Well, and Eve, you can probably speak more intelligibly to this than I can, but my understanding of the Social Action Committee before COVID, we did a lot of fundraising for local organizations. My understanding was, each month there would be a different nonprofit that we would choose to partner with and dedicate one of the Sunday offerings to them. And there's several organizations that we have, collected sizable donations for. And so that was a huge piece of what we were doing. And I think just during the time, it hasn't been worth pursuing.
No,
it hasn't been very well, but it did function well in the past.
The decision in the group as it was, and what was left of the group, post-COVID, was to curtail our fundraising because it just wasn't happening in the way we needed it to until we can get past the COVID situation. There are 3 obligations that we have that are ongoing obligations, and we are meeting those regardless from the funds that we have. But the funds just are not coming in. And we really want to do something for Food for People. We've always dedicated March to Food for People, which is when they celebrated need. We have to do something. So that's an ongoing conversation between myself and HUUF right now.
Okay.
Well, we would have a brunch once a month.
We
And
would.
if somebody from the organization, these were nonprofits, and they would come and speak until everybody who gave during that service went to that organization, and we would raise anywhere $500 to $1,000 for every month for each organization. So we would pick a year ahead who we were going to, 11 or 12 who we were going to have.
12.
Yeah. And it was great. It was a great brunch, and everybody paid $5 to pay for the brunch. And, we had we'd eat outside and inside, and, like 50 people would be eating lunch together. And, it was a great fundraiser. So, but it's not happening now.
And then above and beyond brunch, from that Sunday, all the offerings would go also, in addition to the money we raised from brunch, and they would all go to the organization. And since then, we've just been having what's called designated offerings. And that is, we've just been asking folks to send the money in, earmarked for these organizations. And it has dwindled a lot.
Have you thought about moving these brunches to an online platform at all?
I don't know how we could do that.
I've seen some
Here, have some
examples
virtual potluck, my potato salad.
Yeah, I've seen some examples of organizations like preparing meals and then boxing them, and then like hosting something online, and then like before the event they like distribute the meals. People can come and pick them up safely, COVID safe, take them back to their house just in time for the workshop. And so something to just maybe brainstorm about, but I'm not sure how successful those have been, but.
It's a nice thought.
Yeah.
I just had a question. So kind of looking at all of this from a program building perspective, because it sounds like y'all have done some incredible work in terms of like getting community together to like meet and talk and share food and learn and build those relationships. That you've done amazing fundraising work supporting local community organizations. And it sounds like too that there are other skills present here and interests present here too that can be deeply beneficial to the community. Granted, like the things that are popping into my head are not necessarily COVID time things, but I was going to ask, I know you have like incredible grounds. Does HUUF have a community garden? Is that something I would want to establish?
Many times people have brought that up, but it's always, as you know, probably somebody starts a garden and then they lose interest.
Yeah.
So if, that's the problem. You want to start a community garden at HUUF. Somebody's got a and the way our past minister, who he was just great, you have to assign 3 people, to be out there, in charge of this. So it really happens. And it just hasn't happened because we haven't found 3 people that would be able to take this on.
Right. And that's just like case in point. We all have these amazing ideas, and then the actual follow through is what gets us. But just thinking through to, and again, I'm just starting to brainstorm, and I really want to also open up the second column there of like what y'all want to do. But and if you want to engage more and run more programs and run more direct services or resources for the community, if that's the direction you want to go. But just thinking through, like one of the easiest ways I found to work through the issue of there not being someone in this organization who can see this project through is building partnerships with, say, if there is, a local organization that does community gardens. More so, I know you're right next to Jacoby Creek Farms, I think. That coming in, being like, okay, they're youth, let's say, like in HUUF,
Mhm.
wants, more ways to engage, can they partner with this organization, come in and do, gardening classes and how to grow your own backyard garden? Are there ways that, how to cook, like how to cook healthy food, how to learn how to eat, local native food here? Are there ways, I know like the Wiyot tribe is doing work with the College of the Redwoods, building a native food forest. And there's the point I'm making here kind of long-windedly is that so many amazing things happen due to partnerships,
Mhm.
and organizations coming together and not reinventing the wheel, right? Because like I know, the American Red Cross is not the right organization to teach people how to plant gardens in their front yard, but maybe Cooperation Humboldt's food team is. And that if we want to run, a food security program for Humboldt, this is just a hypothetical, that would be a great partnership to build. And that's something Red Cross does all the time too, is that as a an international organization, the American Red Cross, a national organization, when Red Cross staff members come into communities, they don't have that on the ground grassroots knowledge that an organization like Food for People or Cooperation Humboldt that's worked with the community for generations in some cases, would have. So just floating that. I'm sorry, that was really long-winded.
Yeah, I want to give you guys a chance to respond. I just want to acknowledge something that I've been hearing from the participants over at HUUF is a lot of already existing relationships and engagement with community partners and organizations. And that is 100% a strength that HUUF already has. And so I just want to value and honor that, because I've seen that from the beginning. I keep learning more about how you guys are getting involved with other community partners. And how are those relationships that you guys have already nurtured and watered going to be, things that are going to connect to, the vision and plan you guys have for HUUF in terms of resilience and community engagement. I'm sure Amy and all you have something to say, perhaps about that, or maybe we can just surface it later, but I did want to acknowledge that.
I think one strength that I witness a lot within HUUF is eldership. There's people that have been involved in either with HUUF or other nonprofits for a really, really long time. So there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of collective wisdom. There's a lot of just knowledge from just years of having been involved in various ways in various communities. Generosity too. I definitely think HUUF is one of the, one of more generous communities that I have witnessed. There's just such a tremendous collective desire and will to be of service, both within the congregation, but also beyond it as well, which is just a beautiful thing. I think, and this isn't, to go to, I guess this would speak a little bit to the skills we want to develop, is like how I think sometimes, especially during COVID, I'd witnessed there is a collective will and desire to serve and to connect and to see things flourish and grow, but it has been really difficult to figure out how to best put that into action. Like one example, we have the caring circle, right? Which again, Eve is part of as well. She has her hand in many, many honeypots. But and the caring circle has always been tasked themselves with, basic things like, if someone needs meals delivered for a short term, right? Because they, they're ill, or they, just recovered from surgery or something of that nature. Give rides, just basic kind of household type tasks. And I know that it's been a struggle during this time in particular to figure out, how do we assess the needs, when there's so many people living in isolation, and how do we routinely meet them, especially when we're a very small committee, that has limited resources and bandwidth and all of that. So the will is definitely there. I think it's just finding those pathways and strategies so that the work is sustainable, and also so it doesn't feel like it depends on just the efforts of a few very heroic individuals, but that it's shared across more of the collective. So yeah, that answers that.
We've also had some really great services where they're breaking us up into small groups, and there's a question, and they've basically been climate type of questions, what we, anything that you can think that really needs to happen. And, that's usually maybe 5 or 7 people. And then we come back to the main group and you have one person kind of tell what we talked about. That's been really great when we're breaking up in small groups with these questions and come back. It's been really great. So it's more interactive. Yeah.
Mhm.
I was thinking about that I'm sorry, there's a dog licking water right behind us. Something hear some noise, that's about it. This understanding too that there's only so much all of us can do, right? And that being really realistic with ourselves about our capacity and our organization's capacities too, that for example, like Cooperation Humboldt does amazing community work and it does a lot more than just disaster response. And we had an amazing program going during COVID disaster response. We had an amazing program going during the fires. But that this understanding, like we can't be everywhere at once, no one can. But looking really systematically at first, what the organization already does, and I think looking at disaster response and community resilience, especially community resilience, not as this like program area, but as a framework for how the organization engages with its community always. And thinking about, is everything we're doing to the benefit of the community's resilience? And I think with an organization like HUUF that just provides tremendous spiritual care to so many people and is this meeting place and community space, like that already is community resilience work. My question is just, are there other ways that it's natural for the organization or for its members or the relationships those members have with other organizations to kind of amplify one another and make this grow more organically? Because there's no resilience in beating yourself to death trying to save everybody around you all the time, that's not resilient to yourself. So yeah, I just think that's a really an important point is, there may not be ways that you can ensure that every single person's mental health needs are met while living in isolation, while you yourself are in isolation, and that understanding that we are so far away as a kind of culture from truly regenerative culture, right? And that we are really, really not in alignment with our planet. We are really not in a space where we can flow harmoniously through these climate shifts and kind of disaster and weather changes and things like that. So that like, we're not gonna be perfect. We're not gonna do everything. There will be disasters that are disasters. The question is just what can we do and how can we always keep learning, and always keep improving and always keep asking that question. How does this make our community stronger, more resilient, more adaptable? So yeah, sorry, I just went on a long-winded philosophical ramble there. Yeah, looking at the time too. Do folks want to stay until 7:30 or do we want to start wrapping it up? We originally had it scheduled for an hour and a half, but I know it's late. And go ahead, Amy.
Well, I know we're a small group, but I also know Eve and Joanna, you've been with HUUF longer than I have. I just, that one question on the last slide about what our community wants to grow into and to work on, I would be curious just to hear what your responses are to that. I mean, I have my own laundry wish list that I would, if I could wave my social justice, social action magic wand and just see it put into motion, I would, but I'd love to hear what your hopes and ideas and dreams are for what HUUF can grow into in the coming years.
I like the idea that they're going to be replacing the furnace. Is it the furnace they're replacing? That they're going to make everything a little more solar or natural in some way, less dependent on fossil fuels and electricity from PG&E and things like that. Is that what they're working on, Amy?
Yeah, that's what they're working on.
Or Joanna, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to see us progressing in that way. I don't know what's happening with the on-demand for heating water. I'm not sure how that figures into everything. But I like us moving in that direction. One thing I would like to see is I would like to see us take another look at doing food production at HUUF. I know we've been discouraged from doing that before because of the need for fencing with deer. And then we've had other issues besides deer, you know, which we may not have to worry about at this point. I don't know. But I'd like to see fruit trees planted there. There's no reason if one is going to plant trees that it can't be fruit trees that produces something that everybody can enjoy and we can share. And
Better not be apples. Everybody has apples.
well, not apples. Yeah, we won't go there, but there's lots of other things. But also, you know, berry bushes and things. You know, a vegetable garden. There's a fellow named Richard who I believe right now, we have a couple of Richards, but he's one of them, who's doing some little itsy bitsy gardens fenced in out back to protect from the deer. I can't see why we can't do something on a larger basis. I know it's been tried before. I know one issue after another has come up, and those are issues we would need to discuss. So so we could do it, but I think it's something we should look at once again. So those are my thoughts.
To respond to the tree idea, Cooperation Humboldt.
Like the same thing.
Yeah, we do fruit trees installations.
I think you already did plant a fruit
We
tree
have
there.
2 of your trees in our
Yeah.
the back of our yard space that Rebecca.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, great. Need lots of them. Peaches, we could use peaches. They grow in that area.
And that's something to think about too, getting back to that whole thought about creativity is, you know, even if you don't have the way you'd think of it normally running, where there's, you know, 3 members of the congregation who this is the project that they really want to focus on, and they set up a schedule and they do it and they, you know, and then it's done. But thinking through, are there neighbors, like just people who live in Bayside, say, who want a place to garden and would be comfortable helping set up a garden if they got a free garden plot? And this isn't to be like, oh, you guys have to have a garden and you're just doing it wrong if you're not, you know, of course not. Like these things, there are always challenges, right? If like building utopia were easy, we'd have done it by now. And so I completely want to validate that, but just this idea too, that like, just because it didn't work in the past, doesn't mean it can't work in the future with a new strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that like,
And my
so many creative ways that we can respond to our community's needs.
My saying that it would be something for discussion, that discussion was simply thinking about any in-house controversy over how it should be done or what should be done, and that has come up as an obstacle more often than people not being able to get out and keep it up.
We do a whole section of this workshop on how to deal with in-house controversies in your organization about how and how to judo people into thinking everything's their idea.
And we aim for consensus, but that doesn't mean we always succeed.
I love that.
Yes, we do. We succeed. Yeah.
So I just want to be mindful of the time, kind of start wrapping up this discussion, because it sounds like there's some really amazing thought going into like really understanding that, you know, COVID has made everything hard on everybody and limited our capacity for what we can do, especially in terms of caring for one another when we can't be together in the same space. But it sounds like there's energy coming out of this too, of people saying, okay, what are we going to do for the next disaster? You know, now that we know how bad things can get, once we're able to be together in person, you know, what can we do with the energy that comes with that again? And that I'm hearing a lot of people talking about food and talking about the grounds, talking about gardens and fruit trees. I'm hearing about the energy resilience and getting and heating and just even something too as simple as having solar panels on your roof. That I don't know if that's something you guys probably right now can't with COVID, but put that out through social media, like, hey, if your power's out, come to us and you can charge your phone. We have solar panels. Even that is like such a huge help for community resilience in ways that we may not think of. So yeah, it sounds really awesome. It sounds like y'all are really have your caps on in terms of, okay, like, what are we doing? What can we do? And how do we really contribute to our community? So I was going to go on to our last slide, actually second to last slide. So Oscar, if you want to. So just wanted to close out this first workshop. Thank you all for being our kind of test subjects. That sounds so horrible, for guinea pigs for this this like inaugural community resilience workshop series pilot program. So to open the floor in a second, just if there's any closing thoughts or remarks, and then there's just a note that after this slide, there's a slide of resources, and I'm going to email that to you, Amy, to send out if folks want it. We're just doing a couple every week to not overwhelm folks. These are not, you should read this, you have to by next week. It's just if you want to learn more, here are some resources we think are really good. But I wanted to read this quote from a book I mentioned earlier in this little presentation. That's something I love. That was the book that got me interested in doing disaster work, which is A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. And she writes, "It's tempting to ask why, if you fed your neighbors during the time of the earthquake and fire, you didn't do so before or after." And that to me is the ethos of what community resilience really means. So with that, thank you all so much. And I just wanted to open the floor if there's any closing thoughts or remarks on this week's workshop. Next week, we'll be talking about disaster preparedness and the more kind of 101 first aid pack a bag level and the Red Cross Ready rating. So before then, yeah, just any last thoughts before we close out?
Well, it's been really great meeting you, and it's been a great conversation. So I'm really happy.
Thank you guys so much. This has been really great. And I'm really excited to see, like what our next steps are too, and figuring out how we can take this from thoughts into action in the coming weeks. So yes, Amy.
Well, I want to say thank you too. I really, really appreciate you guys, just this whole, just how much preparation and care and love you've all obviously put into this. And thank you for test driving it with us. I'm going to send out another batch of emails to all of our committee chairs and share the recording with them. And I'm sure it's very intentional, but I love that you're closing your slide deck here with the redwood, right? Because there's just that, that image of the roots that fan out and link up with all the other trees. How you're going to say something on that anyway, but I love that because I think that's really, really poignant and so key to this point. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. That last slide, Oscar, is just some resources, and thank you all so much. We will see y'all next week, hopefully, and spread this around to your friends and neighbors.
I just wanted to say thank you for doing this. It's been a great start. I think it's been a really great start. I look forward to next time.
Thank you guys so much. And I just want to say it's so awesome to hear you guys centering engagement. And like wanting to have more engagement with community gardens and like thinking of how to get people involved. That's really what's going to get that's going to lead to feedback, and that feedback's going to lead to a collective direction. So I'm really happy that you guys have that mindset. It makes it really rewarding for us to, and much more, aligned with what we believe when you guys are participating in that fashion. So I just really want to put that to high ground and just say, I'm really happy that you guys are the people we can pilot this with.
Thanks. Also, could you go to the last slide just so the resources? Thanks. So those are just a couple of things. I will send that out to Amy to send to all of you. But in case anyone wants to jot that down, those are just some really awesome resources on what we were talking about. And the second one specifically is focused on what we can do to build just transition during this whole pandemic situation. And I should probably let my housemates start making noise in our house again. So thank you all so much. Pleasure. And
all right.